Welcome everybody. Good morning. You are in the 11:30 presentation block, and we're going to get some logistics out of the way first. My name is Josh Norwood, and I'll be moderating the session today. And if you don't already know, we have sessions going on to 1 o'clock today. And at the close, we will be giving away some great door prizes, and you have to be present to win. A lot of folks have missed out on some good prizes so far, so make sure you stick around. Also, be sure to check out the NCAUG merch on the conference page. All of the proceeds for that go towards our scholarship funds, so very important. Lastly, all of these sessions are being recorded and will be put up on the NCAUG YouTube page at the conclusion of the conference. It does take time, so please be patient. Moving on to the main event, this morning's presentation is titled No Code Analysis Options for Web App Builder, My Journey to Utilizing the Geoprocessing Widget. And our speaker today is Jeff Webb from the city of Wilson. He is a GIS professional bringing almost 15 years of local government experience to the field. He earned his degree in geography from the East Carolina University in 2002. And currently serves as the GIS specialist for the city of Wilson. Jeff received his GISP in 2014 and is dedicated to becoming a more active part of the GIS community within his city, region, and state. Finally, we encourage you to ask questions. Feel free to enter them in the chat box, and we'll get to those at the end of this presentation. And also make sure for continuing education credit that your Zoom name is your legal name and not a nickname. So we don't want to have to scramble trying to figure out who you are. We're probably not going to scramble. So make sure you change your name if it is a nickname or a phone number. If you have any questions, let us know. With that being said, Jeff, take it away, man.
Josh, that is correct. We're not scrambling.
Yep,
We're not going to scramble.
All right, thank you, Josh. So today I'm going to be speaking to you guys a little bit about Web App Builder and kind of like my journey to this widget that I'd never used before, specifically for a project for our fiber department. So the way that I typically think of a thing to present on is, so I've been in GIS for almost 15 years, and if something takes me a long time to do, it means I've never done it before, then hopefully that's something that people out there have never seen or could use that help for. And so that's why I chose this topic for this year. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. A little bit of background. Actually, I'm going to let you know, I'm going to turn my video off because I've got a little lag issue and all my notes are on the screen over here. So I'm going to be looking at the side anyway. You don't want to see the side of my face. You want to see the pretty front face. So I'm going to stop my video. All right. So my journey to utilizing the geoprocessing widget. The city of Wilson has a lot of, we utilize GIS a lot here. We have power users in all of our utility departments, plus fire, police, planning, public services. And each one of those departments is responsible for their own data. GIS services, which I'm a part of, we have a group of 3 of us with, we have programmers, analysts. I'm a specialist. I do mostly a lot of editing and a lot of these web map type things that we're pushing out to our departments, but we are not responsible for all the different utility departments' data. They have embedded users in them that are editing all their data, which means that I am not an expert in all things data for the city of Wilson, which is one of my points later on. Make sure you know your data when you're doing projects for people, because that could have saved a lot of time for me. Right now, currently, we've got around 85 desktop installations, which, believe it or not, that sounds like a lot to some people, but we had a lot more several years ago. We had over 140 desktop installations. And a few years ago, when ArcGIS Online started becoming a little more popular and a little more accessible, and I learned a little bit more, we did a pilot program for our field workers where we created an online web application builder map so that they could use those and test them out instead of using their ruggedized tough books that were costing us thousands of dollars to use. And that was a great success. And since then, we have created web applications for almost every utility department, actually every utility department, and most other departments within our city have some sort of web application that they use. We can see that from our portal users. Right now, we've got around 130 named user accounts that are accessing that. And what we've noticed is that people who never used ArcMap before are using these web applications because it's so much easier, it's so much accessible for them. One of our departments, the police department, we created a map for them. I won't get into what that content was for, but we only had 2 ArcMap installations in the police department. But right now, the entire command structure wants to now have access to see this web application. So we're getting more and more people are starting to get on board with these web applications. And then lastly, we're trying to create all these because as the person who's responsible for all those desktop installations, once we move to Pro, I want as few of those things out there as possible. I want my power users to use it. I want my editors to be on it. But after that, we want all these users to be on web applications if possible. So the big ask for this project was our city's fiber department, which we call Greenlight. They had a web application and they came to me and they said, we love the application, but we want to know if we can do this. We want to click on this enclosure, which I have this purple line pointed to. We want to click on this enclosure, which represents the cabinet or whatever it is on the ground. And we want to be able to find out what members are associated with that, which are these green check boxes at the end. And they're connected by the fiber lines that run between them. So I was like, okay, well, that's pretty interesting. You know, if we were in ArcMap or Pro, that could be done with a model pretty easily. I'm no modeling expert, but I think I could figure that out. But I didn't know how to add a mod to do any sort of modeling stuff in Web AppBuilder. So I had just seen a presentation on Arcade, and I was like, I wonder if you can do something like that in Arcade. So I know I said no code. So this will be my only little bit of code stuff in there. I started playing around with Arcade a little bit. I'm not an Arcade professional. And I really started thinking about this am I going to do this as a model? I'm not going to get into the Arcade stuff here. It's not even completed. I got one piece of the puzzle done. How do you get the IDs of these things? I didn't even get to the IDs of the members, but when I presented that to them, they were like, yeah, that looks good, but all we can see is the location IDs of those things. We can't actually see where they're at on the map. So it's good, but it's not really what we're wanting. What we really want to know is how do we click on that and see it, see them on the map and be able to export those points as a table. There's no way to do that from using the Arcade. What I will say about Arcade, I watched the guy 2 sessions ago. His whole thing was about Arcade. It was scary, crazy to me. And I'm like, how do you do that? But I was able to do, it took me a few weeks and some help and a lot of errors and a lot of fixing stuff, but you can get started on Arcade to do some simple stuff too. It just might take a little time. So that didn't work for me. So I had to figure out what was my next solution going to be. So I started thinking about the model thing again. This is the part where I say, make sure you know your data. I had worked on the model. I'd worked on trying to figure out how to get stuff working. And then I just happened to notice in the symbology of this map that the enclosure ID, if we can see here, it's like H3014B21.1. And I was like, wait a minute, the members have that exact same label over top of them. So that means that the members already have that information in it. So I had spent days and weeks trying to figure out how to first do an Arcade expression to add a field to the pop-up, then trying to get the model working, and a simple filter really gave them what they needed for the project. And I'm going to go through all of this stuff a little later on. I'll open up the Pro to show you how everything was set up, and then I'll show you the application itself. But really, if I would have paid a little bit better attention, I could have seen that we could have gotten them exactly what they wanted by doing a simple filter. But then I wouldn't have this cool presentation to show you also. So they liked it. It was easy to view and export the points out, but they had to manually type in this value. And when they turned on the filter, they would close it, zoom somewhere else, and then they forgot to turn the filter off. So they're like, this is kind of aggravating. Can we still do something else? So that's when I started researching, how do I get model functionality in Web App Builder? And I was looking through all the different widgets, and I came across this geoprocessing widget. And after reading about it, I was like, I think this might be it. And so I started working, I started creating my model in Pro. I got my model in Pro working, and then I created it as a service, and then I tried to bring it into my Web App Builder, and it just wasn't working. Nothing was happening. And so my first major hurdle that I had to overcome with that is understanding that models in Pro don't function the same way for the geoprocessing widget. So there are little things that you have to change the output, and I'll show some of these examples in a minute, that the model in Pro just functions a little bit differently, and I'll show that. So output parameters, once again, I'm not a modeling pro either. So I've created only a handful of models in my life. I don't know if parameters are usually required for models, but they definitely are required for geoprocessing services. If you don't have input parameters and output parameters, nothing will work as a geoprocessing tool, because when we're setting up that tool in the configuration, you have to actually configure those parameters to make it work. So after I learned about needing parameters, then I finally had a tool that worked. I couldn't figure out how to select the point, and I couldn't figure out how to make it show up on the map, but I could use the select by attribute and export to Excel, and I can make that work in the web app. I still had to type in the ID, not really much different than what that filter widget was, but at that point I was excited because at least I got a tool that was working inside of Web App Builder. So I got a tool that was working, but I still wasn't able to actually select anything. I was just able to use an attribute to select to use as my input. So I was like, all right, how do I do this? How do I figure out how to be able to select? And so what I found after I was going through the service configuration, painstakingly going through almost every option, almost everything, until I found out what was going on. In the parameters, you have to set the input mode as user defined. The default for that is a choice list, and that didn't work for what I was trying to do. So once again, I'm going to show all this in just a few minutes, so it'll make a little bit more sense. So now I was able to select by location, but I still couldn't get it to show up on the map. So I was like, all right, well, I can select it. I can still do it, export to Excel, but it's still not exactly what we want. So finally, I was like, all right, so how do I get these results highlighted on the map? Can't tell you what I did right. I restarted the model, and this time it worked. I can't tell you how many times I get calls from people around the city that said, this thing was working in ArcMap yesterday, and today it's not working. And for some reason, stuff just messes up. And I say, create a new map, bring all those layers back in it, and inevitably it always works. So I learned that, I used that here. I said, I don't know why this model isn't working. Let me restart it. Magically, everything showed up in the map like it was supposed to. The problem I was having then is that it was only working one time. And because in my model, I had a wrong tool in my model. So what it was actually doing was, I thought it was creating a temporary layer to add as a parameter, but it was actually using that to write a hosted feature service to our web server. So that was a big no-no. We didn't want that going on. So I had to figure out what was going on. But I was finally able, I got that figured out. I just removed that create feature layer tool from the model and just used the output, the original output as the parameter, and everything worked like it should. So I know that was all really boring and you're probably like, what is he talking about? Hopefully this is going to get a little bit easier for you to see because we're going to move on to the demo portion and the pro. So here, these are our layers that they needed to use. They have the enclosure, the fiber line, and then the members. So the two scripts that I had, or the two models that I have working here, basically it just takes these, it does a select by location, it's intersecting the points and these lines, and it's buffering by 5 foot, because what we notice is that even though all this data is in the geometric network, stuff doesn't always get snapped properly, so things were getting missed. And so we just did a 5 foot buffer just to try to help any lines that weren't snapped properly. Once we got our members output, I was doing the easy button so they could just export that out to Excel, because that's their end product, was they wanted to see it in Excel. The problem with that though was that they weren't seeing it on the map. So really they want to be able to see it on the map and export it to Excel was their end goal. So that was the export to Excel. The select members is very similar. It's just taking this off. So because I had done this model first and I had this table to Excel parameter, here's where I had that create feature layer, because for some reason I was like, well, if you needed this extra step to be that a parameter, maybe I need this other step. And that was what was messing me up. It was creating it, causing it to write to our hosted feature services. Once I took that off, everything was working fine. So the way this would work, the way you set up a geoprocessing service is it will be a simple process. You have to run that tool first. So I'm just going to select this point and I'm going to select my members, and I'm going to hit this over here. I'm going to hit run. And what you're going to see is that all of these features are going to highlight. So the model's working. What I will say about what's cool about the Web App Builder using these models is that if I was using this in Portal or in Pro, I would probably change this model up, because my end result would really just be these points. But if you're talking about deselecting things in your model, that jumbles up your model some kind of bad. And so I was like, I'm not trying to do that. As we'll see in a minute, because the output parameter here, that is the only thing it's showing on the web application anyway. So I didn't go through the pain of having all these extra steps to deselect these. Once you've run your tool, you can go to the analysis tab, go to history, and you can see I've run this a bunch of times just to make sure everything was working. Right click on that and then do share as a web tool. And this is where all the magic happens. You've taken all this time to create your models, make sure it's all working. But this is the big step to make sure everything is working the way you need it. I'm not going to go through everything here on these panes. This is where you can save your stuff. I'm logged into our enterprise now, so it's asking for portal folders and stuff. If you're logged into ArcGIS Online, you can put it wherever you need to put it. Configuration, there's not much going on there. I've tried all these different things. I've tried the difference between synchronous and asynchronous. I didn't really see a difference. We're not letting people upload files, so that wasn't a big deal. But content, this is where I actually made a big mistake in thinking I knew something that I didn't. In our portal or ArcGIS Online, every time I always saw this pencil mark, I always thought it was like the rename the feature thing or rename the web map, because that's what I happen to do more often. So when I saw this immediately, or first, I was like, I don't want to rename this, it's fine. And so I didn't realize that that was the configure the tool properties button. So I got actually stuck on this piece for a while. So once you do that, you can enter in all your information. You can enter in your stuff for your parameters. And this is where the trick for me was to be able to do what I was trying to do, is that the default for your input parameter is choice list. Defaults are good, but they're not always what you need to make this stuff work. Choice list would mean when I open that widget up, it will give me a list that I would then need to pick a layer from to use as my input. Depending on what your project is going to be or what your tool is used for, that may be fine. If you're looking for, if they were looking for all the members in a certain district and that district was a layer, then that would be fine. But because I wanted to get members associated with this one point, you need to change this from choice list to user defined value. And that was my big turn right there, to be able to select on the web application. There's nothing really to do on your members. This is the output. You can go through and you can tell it what fields you want to show up in your output, but there's not much going on. I'm not going to run the tool. Oh, FYI, you have to put text into every one. If it's a description or a tag, make sure you put stuff in, because when you analyze, it's going to tell you to do it anyway. So once we get through that, I'm just going to quickly show you the application itself. Just zoomed into a certain area. So the way you configure these geoprocessing widgets, you would add a widget, find the geoprocessing widget, add it to your map. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to show you the configuration. When you add it, it's going to ask you for the URL. I've put the REST URL endpoint. If you got this saved in your organization somewhere, you could always just search for that, select for that tool, add it, and then you'll start getting all your toolbar configuration or your property configurations here. Once I had all this in the map, once I had my tool in the widgets, I was able to click on the input. Once again, the default for input is select a layer from map. So even though in my service configuration I had it to be a user defined value, the default here is still select a layer. So if I don't change this, then it's still going to ask me to select an entire layer as my input instead of interactively draw. Output is very similar. It's just saying, hey, what symbol do you want to use? If you want to configure the pop-ups, you can add a single symbol. You can add unique symbols. So if you have varying values, different things, you can do graduated symbols and size and all that kind of stuff. That wasn't what I was looking for. And lastly, in my options, I wanted them to be able to export and add as an operational layer. I'm trying to look at my time. I know I've only got a few more minutes left, so I'm going to try to go through this really quickly. The filter, man, this was so easy. If I would have just realized this from the beginning, all they had to do was search. If we would have done H3011A1.3, they could have searched for that. Oh, so this was the problem they were having. They would click on it and then they think something would happen, but they forgot to turn the filter on. So because they are filtering off that number, because that number was in the data, it didn't technically have to have a model, but they didn't like having to manually enter in the data. And then they didn't like that they kept forgetting to turn this off. So because the filter was there, they could export this out as a CSV. They got what they needed, but it wasn't exactly what they wanted. So I'm going to show the export member tool. So the way this works is, if I hadn't changed it to user defined, if I hadn't changed it to select the layer, then here, instead of this point to select, it would have just been a drop down menu where I had to select an entire layer. So here, I'm going to select these points, and you can select multiples. And there's nothing on that one, but what would happen if I ran this, I would get an output of an Excel file, and then then they could download that and export that how they needed. For the tool that they are ultimately using though, this select members tool, the way this works is they can select these points. Unfortunately, you have to click this every time you want to add. You don't have to add multiple, so a lot of times they're just using it for one. And then when you hit run, it's going to take a second. I also noticed that the first time I run it, takes a little bit longer. Second time runs a little bit quicker. So as we can see, I used a input to click on some points, and it ran that model in the background, and it gave me the output of all the members that are connected to these locations. And because of the settings, we can flash those. We can view them in the attribute table. You can save these to your content. If you're signing to ArcGIS Online, you can save that to there. You can create these as layers. So like if I want to go back and see this later, I can say, hey, this is area 1. If I turn members off, hey, I still got my information for area 1, right? So I can go back and look at that later. I can view it in the attribute table. They can now export these out. And that's a lot of work that was going on for me to to get into a very little amount of time showing you this select members tool. I'm sorry about that. But for me, it was a lot of fun trying to figure this stuff out. What I learned is that I am not a professional at Arcade. I'm not a professional at modeling. I'm not a professional at web services, but I am a GIS professional. And a lot of these tools, just got added to my tool belt during this time. Didn't know much about Arcade. I learned a little bit. Didn't know much about modeling. I learned a little bit. And luckily, these helped out in some way in our organization. I know that was a lot. Hopefully it wasn't too boring to you. It was exciting for me to figure this out after all the hours that I spent trying to get to work. And if there's any questions, I'll be glad to try to answer them.
Very good, Jeff. Great presentation. Very cool to see. Live demonstrations are always risky during conference, but yours appeared to work very well. So very cool. I think you did a good job on that one. At this point, it doesn't look like anybody has submitted questions, so we have a couple more minutes. Does anybody have any questions for Jeff? Just put them in the chat if you do. Jeff, how much time would you say you spent on this?
So I would say for the entire process, it was probably about 3 months from the time they requested it till the time that I was able to deliver this tool. Doesn't mean I worked on that the entire time. I had to take some breaks and cool my head when things weren't quite working. I couldn't figure things out. A lot of times the best time to figure something out is when you kind of pull away from it and just try to give yourself time to think. And so I worked on it. This was never a priority for them. This was just something that they wanted to be able to do. So I had the luxury of taking a little bit of time to try to get this right for them. And I kept them up to date on the progress and the progression of all these different tools and stuff. But yeah, it took me 3 months to get it to this point. Like I said, I didn't spend all my time working on this.
Cool deal. We've actually had 2 or 3 questions come in, so we're a little short on time, but I'm sure you can give us a brief answer. The first one's from Chris Cyphers. Have you used geoprocessing to generate reports from Portal?
I do not. That was about as short as I can make it.
Okay. Moving on, Brett Spivey, did this start to open eyes about replicating geoprocessing services throughout the departments?
It did not. I don't know if I have a fried brain or whatever, but I'm not even processing that question at the moment. So.
All right. Well, we'll move along.
I'm sorry.
If you could do one thing differently next time, what would you do different?
I think, well, there's a couple things, but one, really drilling into the user to find out what they really want. I went through several iterations of this. What I found out is that when people request things from you, they request on a very limited, broad, or limited scope of what they really want. They don't know what's available, what you can do. And if I would have really drilled and sat down with them and really drilled into what they wanted, I could have avoided a lot of these other steps that I went through to get to it. Their first request was, how do we click on that point and see what's attached to it? Well, that's where I was immediately like, okay, well, maybe I can just give them a pop-up, and in the pop-up, there's a field with that. Well, that's not really what they wanted. They wanted to be able to do this and then that. And then to just make sure you understand your data, because if I'd have understood it, and I could have given them that filter widget months ago, I actually didn't realize that about the filter widget until almost the end of this process. So if I could have gave that to them a little sooner, I feel kind of dumb for saying I didn't know my data, but I didn't pay attention to it. But pay attention to your data. Make sure you really understand what your user is wanting and ask good leading questions to get them to what they want without them even knowing that's what they wanted.
Very good points. All right, our time is gone. There will be a pop-up poll that's getting ready to come up. So I appreciate everyone attending. We got a break coming up. So make sure you join back after the break for the last session, and then finally our wrap up and door prizes. And remember, you have to be present to win. So Jeff, I do appreciate it, and thank you all for attending.